Welcome to the Honest Field Guide podcast, a weekly show dedicated to winning in entrepreneurship. I'm your host, JinJa Birkenbeuel. I'm the CEO of Birk Creative, a leadership, brand strategy, and visual identity agency dedicated to helping scale brands and assist with their adaptability with the market. On my show, you get to eavesdrop in on intimate conversation with business leaders and inspired entrepreneurs, designed to give you tips and strategies so your own business can thrive. Subscribe and join me each week for laughter, inspiration, and honest stories. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to my show, the Honest Field Guide podcast. I am your host, JinJa Birkenbeuel. Thank you so much for joining me today. I always say this every show. You could be anywhere in the world because everything's virtual, but you've decided to listen to my show, and I'm so grateful for that. I would love it if you would leave a review on Apple Podcast and put a like or a follow on Spotify. Anytime you like my show or leave a review or leave a great comment, it's really great not only for my show, but it's also great for my guest. And I have an amazing guest on my show today. She is amazing. And some of you probably already are going to know who she is because she is a celebrity in the design world. Okay. And I have to say, I first discovered this guest of mine on Instagram. And it was really interesting because it was right around the time that I was going through a natural hair transformation journey from processed hair to natural. And I don't know why I was getting these images and these videos, but I saw this amazing Black woman exercising and dancing in a beautiful apartment on a floor mat with natural gray peppered speckled hair. And I was like, oh my God, who is this woman? This like beautiful Black woman dancing, singing, unapologetic, unbothered. And I'm like sitting here having my own epic struggle of like survival and relevancy. And I'm watching and I'm like, wow. What's going on, And then I started seeing, and I started following her. And then I noticed that she resigned from her role at a university. And that was the one thing. But the main thing that jumped out at me was she had like hundreds of students crying on Instagram about leaving them. And they were just like, we love you. Where are you going? Why are you leaving us? And I was just like, okay. Who is this like celebrity woman who has all these young students saying that she had a huge impact on their life? And I was thinking of my own life in college. Like I had a couple of people that, were really important to me that if they weren't there, I don't know that I would be where I am today. And I'm sure that this beautiful guest of mine had the same experience. So anyway, the next thing I saw was, oh my God, she published a book, Decolonizing Design, a Cultural Justice Guidebook, which I have right here. And I was like, okay, you know what? This woman is doing amazing stuff. I need to find out more about her. And I invited her to come on my show. I mean, she's so low-key interesting. She's writing extensively about racism in the design industry, which is an industry that I'm in. I've written articles about this myself and essays. I've written things on LinkedIn and Instagram. So I'm all about like what is happening and why can't we make it in the design business when you're Black, especially when you're a Black woman. So I want to welcome Dori Tunstall, Dr. Dori Tunstall, author of the brand new book, Decolonizing Design, a Cultural Justice Guidebook. Dori is a design anthropologist, researcher, academic leader, writer, and educator. She was the Dean of Faculty of Design at OCAD University in Toronto, Canada until 2023, and the first Black Dean of a Faculty of Design anywhere, which is completely wild and amazing and insane. She has done so much more than that, and hopefully we'll get to learn a little bit more about Dori today. Welcome to my show, Dori.
Thank you, JinJa. I'm so excited to be in conversation with you.
Finally, right? Finally. So I want to definitely talk about your new book, Decolonizing Design, but I actually have to know, I consider myself a multi-hyphenate in the creative space, and I feel like you are too. And I want to understand, I don't really like titles, but how do you explain to people, like, do you have a title? Like, what is it that you tell people?
My title now is Lead Executive Officer of Dori Tunstall Inc. And we say lead because, again, my work is around decolonization, and there is some sensitivity amongst the Indigenous community on the use of the title chief. So you can be Chief Executive Officer and doing decolonization if you're listening to Indigenous communities. So we say, okay, I'm a lead executive officer. because and Dori Tunstall Inc. really focuses on helping organizations build respectful relationships with cultural communities, and doing so with a sense of decolonization, but also with a sense of like care. And I always talk about joy, so liberatory joy.
Hmm. Wow, that's incredible. I love that, and I never knew that about chief executive officer. I never thought about that, and now I'm going to give more thought to calling myself chief executive officer of my own company, Burt Creative. I mean, I love you for sharing that, and I know that you're a teacher. That's what I know about you. You teach so much, and you teach so many people. But before we get into that, I kind of want to understand what kind of environment you grew up in when you were younger, because I just imagine that you were some kind of an explorer or something, or like you were really curious, looking at things, noticing things that no one else noticed, because that's the designer's mind. And I'm a
Mm,
designer, and it drives some people insane. Like, why do you notice all these things? I'm like, I can't help it. I
mm.
don't know if it's a curse or a blessing. So did you feel like you were different? Did you know you were different? Did people know that you were different? What was going on when you were young?
So I grew up in Indianapolis, Indiana, in the Midwest, in a solidly working middle class Black neighborhood on the east side of Indianapolis. Um, let's see, I think I was always so I talk about that like I am. Let's say I'm one of those kids that we had long conversations about skipping grades when I was in elementary school because I like tested off the charts. But interesting enough, my family wouldn't, they said they wanted me to be normal, and they wouldn't allow me to skip grades and be one of those kids who like graduate, you know, university at the age of 16. And so in that sense, I was always different. Um, I was one of the generations that underwent desegregation when, let's say, the Indianapolis realized that they had set up a segregated system of inner city schools and white suburbs due to white flight. So their solution to that was to put Black kids on buses at 6 o'clock in the morning and drive them into suburban schools so that they went to school. And I say that was really important in terms of me having a sense of cultural awareness enough to want to be an anthropologist, because I literally, from that moment of fourth grade, I became uh, culturally aware of Black culture being distinct from white culture, and having, on a survival tip, right, having to navigate that. So going home to Black culture, going to school, which pretty much immerses you in white culture, and having to navigate that. So my interest in anthropology comes from trying to figure out why people believe and think the way they are as a survival survival strategy in fourth grade, fifth grade, and continuing. And then the design part comes from just coming from a really creative family that, actively encourage drawing and making and taking you to museums and things. So coming from a rich, I say specifically Black cultural heritage as well, because this is, again, I grew up in the 70s as a really young person, and so this is like the time of Black is Beautiful. Um, uh, and so, my family also made sure we were deeply, deeply steeped in Black culture and Black cultural productions, and valued Black cultural production, right?
Wow. Are you an only child, or do you have siblings?
No, I'm the middle child, so I have one older brother, one older sister, and one younger sister.
Wow. Okay. Wow. So you
And
have a large family.
I'm definitely the middle child.
I know. I love that. I mean, I actually do have a middle child. I have an older and a younger, and I have a middle boy. And middle children are going to save the world. I mean, they're like the best. You know what I mean? I mean, they have certain things they have to figure out, because they're not the first or the last. They really have to deal with all kinds of stuff in their families. So I love that. What sparked your imagination was, you growing up in the 70s, and, having a family that thankfully was focused on Black excellence. Even back then, there probably wasn't a word for that. That wasn't something that
Oh
came out of
no,
people's
it
mouth.
was. I
It
mean,
was Black is
like my
beautiful. It wasn't Black excellence.
Well,
Um,
and but I think that, really there was like it's a thing where like my aunts and uncles and parents, like they were the ones who fought for having like Black history in the school. So they were all like full on
mhm,
Black
mhm,
excellence, right?
mhm. I love it.
Uh, and, like going through the chart of like Black inventors, like flashcards, like that was they were like you will know that you can do anything, right? Because we've done anything before, in spite of all the racial structures that try to keep us oppressed. So they were
Interesting.
hardcore.
I mean, I love it. I feel like my father was like that as well. And my mother was an educator, so I did have some of that going on in my house. I'm curious, moving into the college space because that's a whole nother level of, crazy and racism and intensity when you're black in a white school. I'm assuming I don't know. So you went to Bryn Mawr College, which is
Yeah.
a women's school focused on women only. Not an HBCU. You went to Stanford. Did you have a mentor in college, or what was it like getting there? Because I remember when I was in college. I mean, I grew up in an interracial family, so I wasn't raised in a black cultural home. I was raised in a multicultural home because of where my family came from and who my grandparents were. So I know for me, it was different than some of my other friends that went to the school I went to, where they were really from black environments and black communities and black neighborhoods. But still, I remember getting to college and it was intense. I mean, I had people asking me all kinds of crazy stuff, thinking I was from the projects, or, what's it like being in Chicago? Did you get shot every night? Or, it's just like, crazy stuff like that, right? What about you? What was because, you came in with a strong sense of identity, black identity. What was it like for you in these white environments in college?
Well, I think so. Just to be clear, like, so in fourth grade, I was identified as gifted, which
Mhm.
again, giftedness is a neurodiversity, and that was the last time. Once I was identified as gifted, that was the last time that I was in a class with other Black students. So my whole entire, again, elementary school, junior high, high school was primarily me and other white and Asian students mostly. And then, so college was just for me another extension of that. Um, in terms of racism, I think the most racist experience I think I had was in my first year, and it was around the fact that, again, only Black person in the class. And at one point in time, the fellow students stopped kind of answering the questions. This was an English lit class. Stopped answering the questions that the professor was putting. And when the professor asked why, they said that, oh, because Dory always knows the answer. And so for like the next couple of weeks, I kind of just silenced myself, right? Just like, okay, I'll cede space. Um, and then finally, like the professor told me, like, don't let them shut you down that way, right? Like, don't play dumb. Um, and because they're intimidated by the fact that you are really, really, intelligent. And that's not the problem, because Bryn Mawr, everyone's intelligent. The problem they're having, right, is that you are a Black woman who has so much greater intelligence than they do. So don't let them stop you. And that was like the last time I let anyone try to like get me to play dumb so that they can feel bigger, or silence myself so that they can um, not be intimidated by how much I knew or just what curiosity I had. So that was probably like the most racist experience that I had. And then after that, it was a thing where, like Bryn Mawr College is exceptionally diverse place. So you had, so my cohort was one of the largest Black cohorts at Bryn Mawr College. Like there was 12 of us.
Oh, a whole
I
12.
lived a couple of years in Perry House, which was the Black House. And it was interesting because I think there was a lot of tension because we had like again, so many diversities of how to be Black. Like that was really cool about the experience there, was that there was so much diversity about how to be Black. So there was like, you know, for some reason I got identified. People assumed that I was like, I grew up in like the Huxtables. Not that we can call this anywhere, but that was the assumption. Like everyone was like, "Oh my God, Dori, were your parents like doctors or whatever?" And I'm like, "No, my mom was like a hairdresser. My dad, worked the Naval Avionics Center." So there was all these kinds of like weirdness in terms of like um, not fitting pre, like I'm not necessarily from like an urban ghetto, right? In the same sort of way. I wasn't, and there was a lot of like Black and bougie, and I wasn't quite that either, but I could speak the language. I could operate in that world. So it was really interesting experience because I had to kind of define my own sense of Blackness in that space, which was amazing because again, to have enough diversity of Blackness around you that you could be like, oh, I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not this. Oh, I can just be myself, was really amazing, and it's kept me grounded, in an authentic sense of Blackness that is my own and my family owns and my community owned, without feeling even like the pressure um, to be one form, one very stereotypical form of Blackness, whether that's like Black and bougie, or whether that's some assumption of like growing up, in some kind of ghetto.
Yeah, I mean, I have a friend of mine. His name is Viet Nguyen. He has a book called The Sympathizer. He won a Pulitzer for it, and now it's actually on an HBO Max
Yeah,
show.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I learned a lot from him. I had him on my show a while back, but I learned a lot from him because he talks about narrative scarcity and how in the Asian community there's a lot of narrative scarcity, in the Black community there isn't. But that's happened over time for us, right? Because back then when you're describing, the only visual of a family like that was the Huxtables, and what's wild about it is that it wasn't unusual to have a family like the Huxtables back then, but you just didn't know it. And white people, especially and particularly, didn't have any visuals of that, because what was going on in the 70s visually with Black people was exploitive. A lot of the images were stereotypes and things like that. So
Although I model myself like after Pam Grier and Blaxploitation. Like you talk about like my hair.
I mean,
That
you
is
can't go
that is a
wrong.
direct that
You
is
can't
a
go wrong.
direct
You can't go
reference
wrong.
to Pam Grier.
You can't go wrong. You can't go wrong. I mean, listen, you cannot go wrong. So listen, moving forward, I do want to talk a little bit about your career because I have to
Okay.
get to your book. Um, I don't know if you noticed, I don't know if you noticed or heard the Cat Williams thing, the conversation he was having on the Shay Shay show. And what I loved about this conversation, if you heard the whole thing, is it's 3.5 hours, for God's sakes. I
Mhm,
mean, it's
mhm, mhm.
insane. But it's a totally amazing show. Um, so I think I would love to say, let's all be Cat Williams, because we all have a Cat Williams in the Black community and we all spill the tea. We all know the things. And I kind of want to know, like, how much truth can you share right now about the Black community in design, because it is hardcore in the design industry, right? But I'm not trying to blow anything up, and of course you have this beautiful book, and you have a lot of information and solutions and strategies and knowledge around this space, and we could have another conversation about that. um, but I do want to understand, before you turned to academia, I read that you worked at some really amazing companies like Sapient, and I actually was somebody visited my in-house office back in the day from eLab, watching me work in my office and analyzing my every single step and move. It was I was like, why did you touch that thing? You ever heard of eLab? They actually got acquired by some other company, and they
Yeah,
were basic.
so I started at eLab, and when they finished
What?
the acquisition, I was now
That's
at Sapient. So
That's
I mean,
incredible. Oh my God, you know exactly what I did not
yeah,
see that when I read about you. Oh my God. So
yeah.
talk to me about I mean, we don't have as much time as I want. So talk to me about you know, you worked in corporate and then you ended up in academia, and I don't understand how that happened. And why did that
Okay.
happen?
So let me take a step back. Well, when I did my PhD research at Stanford on Ethiopian tourism development and racially structured identity. So in some ways, it's like a mixture of like there was a very applied anthropology aspect of it, right? Because I was going around looking at tourism, and when I was there, I was, again, meeting with the Ethiopian Tourism Commissioner. I'm meeting with like things saying, oh, these are things that I'm hearing that people can say it's improved, or blah blah blah. So we talk about as a part of a decolonial anthropology of being useful to the communities that you're working with. So I was being useful in terms of doing the work of understanding how tourism could be improved in Ethiopia at the time. Coming out of that experience, like you apply for academic jobs, but again, this is the rise of the dot-com boom. And again, I am in Silicon Valley at the height of the dot-com boom. And so I was thinking to myself, like, actually, the more interesting questions are being asked, which is like, what is this internet thing going to mean to our lives? Like, people forget, like, there was a time that, and people who had to figure that out, right? That this seems to be a really interesting space to be in. So I like put in an application. I actually, the truth, there was a program on CNN called Business Unusual. eLab was featured in that episode that I watched. I wrote an email to eLab saying, I want to do what it is that you're doing. Like, I want to understand why and how people buy stuff, shop stuff, but I want to actually understand what this internet thing is going to mean because I'm in the middle of it. They called me back, said, "What is an anthropologist doing watching Business Unusual on CNN?" I actually was interviewed also for IDEO, but I didn't understand IDEO, so I totally bombed actually that interview. And then by the time they finished their process of talking to me, because this takes months, they had been acquired by Sapient. So then I got hired into Sapient. So again, like I was I was one of those people who were trying to figure out what the internet was going to be and mean. And I went into industry because it's just I follow where the more interesting questions are, right? And coming back out of industry back into academia for me was that I kept going to conferences or people like, how could I do what you do? It seems so amazing. And there wasn't the pathway. So I came back to academia to build that pathway. I tried to build it at University of Illinois at Chicago, trying to build a program in design anthropology where it's like you didn't have to have a PhD from Stanford in order to be able to do this work in industry. And then I ended up at Swinburne University in Melbourne, Australia, and I came because the dean at the time, who was one of my champions, Ken Friedman, said, "You can come and build a program in design anthropology here." So I came, served as an associate dean of learning and teaching because I knew I wanted to step into leadership, so I needed to have administrative experience. And we built a program, a master's of design and design anthropology. It was one of 5 design anthropology programs, master's programs in the world at the time. Graduated about 66, 67 graduates over a period of like 5 years. And basically, it's like at a certain level, like anyone who is doing UX in Australia and in Upper Australia are like 0 degrees of separation from that program. When I left, part of leaving was that the university wanted to shut it down, even though it was extraordinarily profitable. And so when I left, I came to OCAD University because they were already doing some of that work, and I've been working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities very closely. One of the streams in the design anthropology program was Indigenous ways of knowing and being. When OCAD University was looking for a dean that had experience in decolonization and Indigenous revitalization, that was the terms. My experiences in Australia, I'd already done the work in a lot of ways of building Indigenous ways of knowing and thinking into the curriculum, the design curriculum, with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. And so when I came to OCAD, that's what I could offer, and that set the foundation, right, in terms of being able to do a lot of work to change, decolonize, right, design at OCAD, because every time someone said, "Oh, that can't be done," I'm like, "Oh, we did that in Australia, and this is what the outcomes was, and this is, and this is what it meant to the community to be able to do that work." And then their anxiety level went down, and we were able to do the work.
Wow. I mean, you have such an incredible legacy of success. The program that you built in Australia, um, is it still happening right now? I mean, is it
No,
still
no.
alive or
So,
it's completely gone?
it's completely gone.
It didn't even
And
morph
almost
in, it
all
didn't
of
morph
the
into
almost
anything?
all of the design anthropology programs that were established kind of disappeared because they were all reliant on one or two people. And
Okay.
again, people move around a lot. So when
Hmm.
I left, then it kind of like there wasn't really anyone who could carry the full energy of it. And it was profitable because it was like me and one other full-time, maybe like two other full-time staff members, faculty members, and then like again a bunch of adjunct or sessional faculty members who were teaching it. So if you have one person leave, I think I was teaching like 3 or 4 classes per year in the master's program. So in all of these programs, like there are one or two people, and as people move around, it's a lot of momentum to sustain them.
Yeah. And it's like that in corporate. You have one champion, one person, or maybe two, that are passionate about something specifically related to diversity, equity, inclusion. And when they leave, it all goes out with them. And it just, to me, it exposes the lack of will and determination of society in general to sort of keep moving things forward. I want to ask you, design anthropology. I know there's a long answer to this, and I wish we had more time, but you have so many words that you define, and that are words that most people don't even know what they mean. They've never heard of these phrases before. One of them is design anthropology. That's the first time I've ever heard that. When I was reading about it, I thought, wow, I've never even heard this phrase, and it completely makes sense. Why did I learn about this when I was in college, right? How would you? I mean, can you define design anthropology
Yeah.
in a simple way?
Yeah. Design anthropology looks at the way in which design translates values, particularly human values, into tangible experiences. So it looks at what are the values, how they're translated through the design, and how people are experiencing them. And then if there's a misalignment between the design and the experience, then we go through a process of redesign. If there's a misalignment between the values and the experience, then you actually go and articulate a whole new set of values, create some designs around them, and again, test whether or not people are actually experiencing them. So design anthropology is that like double loop of constantly iterating on the values that are being put forth in society, and then the way in which they are made manifest through design as it relates to the kinds of experiences, right, that people want and need to have.
You know, design thinking is something that I think about a lot, and I read about it. And I took a certification class with IBM to have a design thinking certification. And I feel like it's inherently racist. I've always felt this way about design thinking, and I'm sort of curious now. um, is there any overlap between design anthropology and design thinking? What is there any overlap? Are they aligned? Do they not intersect at all? And how do you define design thinking?
Okay. So so again, understand uh, that. So I I grew up in I professionally grew up in the context in which design thinking was being formulated. So understand the bits and pieces where this is coming from. So it's coming from the interactions of anthropologists and designers trying to figure out in the same way that I did, like again, what is the space of overlap? So they are the origins of them in terms of those two interactions are similar. design anthropology for me was just trying to, in light of design thinking, which then subsumed like the anthropology part. Like they stopped talking about the anthropology part and just said, "Oh, this is how designers think." That I was like, well, actually, no, we need to keep the anthropology part there for one important reason. Anthropology, in terms of like a decolonial context, like anthropology, handmaiden of colonization, right, has been a field that has done the deep, deep, deep work to figure out its own role in colonization and create a space for practitioners of different races, origins, or whatever to decolonize the field. So for what I wanted to carry forward, like not dropping the anthropology part and just calling it thinking, right, was that there is actually a whole literature of critique of anthropology that I am carrying forward when I talk about being a design anthropologist. That gets dropped. That critique gets dropped when you talk about design thinking. Because the goals then of design thinking, which is why again they dropped the anthropologist out of it, was that the goal was to have designers in the space of power and influence in corporate organizations. That is their intent and their origin, right? Um, and so to the extent to which they were again trying to prove that we can do strategy just as well as the business people, that desire to be in those spaces, the desire for that power, right, is where again that it functions in the space of oppression, in the sense of that corporate space of power is a space of oppression, right? It's a space of extraction. It's a space of exploitation. And so to the extent that that is where they decided they want to be, right, as a group of, again, like I said, mostly white men who were wanting to join the other white men at the top of the power chain. Um, to that extent, it again, it's oppressive. Maybe that's the way to sort of say it. Because I
versus
don't,
versus racist.
well, I think,
I
racism
mean,
is a
that's
particular
triggering.
form of oppression. I
I
think the
know. Yeah.
oppressions that exist at that level
Yeah.
are beyond those, like it is racism, sexism, homophobia,
Yeah.
it's,
You know
capitalist, there's all these things,
what
right?
I've always told people about the design world, which is it's hard to, and I've been in it a little longer than you have, and people don't understand how powerful the white people are in the design industry, and how impactful their work is with culture all over the world. And you've written about this yourself. I mean, they are the gatekeepers of everything, in my opinion. Designers, white designers, and white design theory and design concepts and big D design, they control the doors and the gates to all types of decisions that are made in America and all over the world, from the messaging coming out of the political space to how, museums are organized, to, what visual brands look like, and who actually gets to work on these projects. I mean, these are very powerful people in the design space, and they're very quiet and they're very hidden, and they're not people that you know about or that you hear about, but they have a lot of power and they have a lot of money. And it's been very challenging for me in the space to, you know, I have to really fight hard to get through and to get things done and to get money and to get contracts. I'm up against 99.9999% of the time white men who control the checks and the budgets and the money and the decisions, and the women that are in front of them that are, signing contracts or whatever it is, or not signing contracts. So um, I feel like there is some kind of an infographic that can be made that shows sort of the family tree, of all of this, to help people really understand how important it is to have design anthropology within any system that is creating anything that communicates to human beings. I mean, it's astonishing. Like when I read the history of the Google logo process, the Google design process, and what they had to do to get through the engineers, it's an incredible story. I mean, it's just I love this conversation, and it gets a little wonky, but I don't care because this is why I have you on my show. Okay, so listen, I want to move on a little bit to your book because we're actually running out of time,
Yeah.
and I did have some other questions to ask you about language and words because I think you could define things for people that would help people really understand some of the challenges that Black designers and Black people and people of color in general are up against when they're trying to participate in the language of creation. You know, we're trying to participate outside of, you know, entertainment and movie stars and, you know, Beyonce. Like, we're trying to do other ways of, we're trying to communicate in other ways besides entertainment. And I think, you know, you're doing an incredible job for this. And I have gratitude for you, Dori, because you're doing really hard work. I was reading comments on YouTube on some of the, you know, the speeches you've given, and there's people out there that they hate this conversation. They're, you know, they're mostly, you know, white people. They don't want to hear about this. They don't want to, you know, talk about it, and they attack you. And I applaud
Oh,
you
that's
for,
interesting because I don't
I
read
applaud you.
any, I don't watch any of, I don't
I'm
read
glad
any of
you
the
no,
comments.
seriously, don't you should not read comments because who cares? I mean, really, like, think about the sad lives of these people that have of all, like I said in the very beginning, there's so many things you can be doing in your life. There's so many points of opportunity for someone to take their time to leave a nasty comment because someone's talking about decolonizing design. That's their problem, not yours. So no, don't look at the comments. But my point is that this is a very difficult, triggering conversation for a lot of people to have, especially in the design space. There's a lot of white men that will never ever want to really talk to you about this because they know that they're wrong, and they've really kept a lot of they've refused to allow progress for a lot of things because, you know, because of, you know, design anthropology. I mean, you know what I mean? Design thinking, they control stuff. Okay, all right. So, Decolonizing Design, a cultural justice guidebook. First of all, I have to say, when I looked at this book, you know, and I don't know if I have time to read something, but what I did notice right away is there's these beautiful little artworks and illustrations of you, Dori, with different hairstyles. And I was like, of course, every picture is you in some cute thing. And, you know, I should ask you, what do you use on your hair? Like, what's your hair product? I use
Yeah.
Pattern. What do you use?
Actually, just castor oil and then like shea butter mixture. And if something particular, I might use, I think like a mousse, like
Oh
just
my
to hold the
gosh.
curls. But that's it.
Wow.
Wash and wear.
I'm using like the corporate stuff. I'm using like Tracy Ellis Ross product Pattern. Okay, that's what
Again,
I have
I
that right
have
now.
that. I tried out the sample of that, but I just find like it's because you know it's for me it's just all about keeping it oil moisturized, right?
Hmm.
So okay, so let me shout out first to Anna Aggie, who's a Nigerian Canadian illustrator who did the illustrations for the book. And the brief to her was to read the book and then pick out the most emotionally charged moment in that chapter and then do an illustration of it. So the illustrations, there's kind of, as you pointed out, like it's all my different
I
hairstyles
love this so
because
much.
I constantly was changing my hair and basically she just went through like my Instagram
That's
feed.
what we do, though. That's what we do,
Yeah,
Dory. We're Black women with natural hair.
yeah. And then the other aspect of it is there's a lot of reference to cinema because I'm a big movie watcher. So like, so the with the exception of the first one is actually just an illustration of just like a photo of me sitting writing the book. Like that was from an Instagram photo. The second one, which I think is the Panopticon, the third, I think, references A Wizard of Oz. So
Well, don't tell
there's
it all
modern
because
times.
don't tell it all. We want people to go buy your
Yeah.
book.
So I just sort of saying is that the element of the illustration reflects again giving a sense of my personality. I chose Anna to do the illustration because she does this comic style, which is very cutesy.
Hmm.
But in her work itself, it's like it's very cutesy, and then she's like hitting on some real issues around like sexism or supporting people with disabilities. And so it's one of those things like when I saw her style and the way in which like I use like a persona of pleasantness, right? I talk about like weaponized femininity. Like, you know how hard my talk is going to be by how dolled up I look because I use soft looks for hard messages.
I love
So
that.
her
I
work
gotta
is
use
very
that.
similar to that, where it's like a soft look so that you can't disengage with the hard message that I'm going to give you within that.
I like
And
it. Well, I think she did a beautiful job interpreting all the things that you're describing. And I love that you hired a Black artist.
so the whole team is Black and Indigenous.
I love it because
So
I
the
I
cover
love
was
it.
designed by Sadie Redwing, who's a
Mhm.
Lakota Dakota designer.
Nice.
The inside of the book was designed by Polymode, which is Silas Monroe, who is African plus American, and then Brian Johnson, who's indigenous of the Mohegan Nation. So it's a thing where, like, actually, MIT Press allowed me to put together this Black and Indigenous design team because they didn't have one. And I was very adamant about having a Black and Indigenous design team so that the content of the book and the form of the book were in perfect alignment with one another, right?
I love that because I do sometimes question Black authors and writers that do publish books, and they do not insist on, and they're talking about diversity initiatives and issues and concepts. And I'm not suggesting that white designers can't work well or interpret things properly. I'm just suggesting that there is something to be said for having an ecosystem of people of color, especially if you're working on doing what you're doing, which is decolonizing the design industry, or even decolonizing the social determinants of health, or trying to change pipelines of STEM. Like where is the proof that you're really doing the work if you're not necessarily incorporating people of color in the process and the ecosystem? That's what we're fighting against.
I
But I want
but
but I want to
but
read
it
I want
takes
to
a
read
lot of
something.
courage. But I want to say it takes a lot
Yeah,
of courage to be able to push back. Because again, in
yeah.
publishing, it's so rare that people get
Hmm.
published. Like if you're not
Okay,
self-publishing,
that's fair.
that you enter into that space actually with, let's say, first a sense of just gratitude that they're interested. Second of all, like there were moments of like if I didn't have a PhD in anthropology, I wouldn't have the guts to negotiate things, right? So
Okay.
and it's expensive. Like, so, I asked for a little bit more money in, in terms of my advance to pay the team. But but again, it wasn't like a lot. It wasn't the money that they were worth. And so what we
Yes,
ended up doing is
understood.
actually now I've arranged with them profit sharing where whenever the book makes profit, that they get a percentage. We figured out the percentage based on like their level of contribution, et cetera, et cetera. And again, I had to do that, like the contract, right, with MIT Press didn't support that. I had to do that as part of the contract I did with the design team, right? So again, it's a thing where like like not everyone has the understanding how publishing works, the boldness, right, to go through the legal ease, right, to say, actually, this doesn't feel right, this doesn't feel right, this doesn't feel right. The resources, right, to hire a team because again, the MIT's press internal team was not Black or Indigenous or any of those things. So have the funding to be able to hire the team to do that work. So I want to set the reality check on all of what it takes to actually make something like that happen and how very few people necessarily have the resources or the wherewithal, right, to do that level of negotiation that I had to do with MIT Press to make that happen, right?
Yeah, but they're also, not going to, I'm not going to cut some of the people I'm thinking in my head slack because it does have to start with the idea and the understanding and the vision of what you're trying to accomplish and having the courage to actually articulate the vision, even if you don't have the wherewithal or the people or the understanding or the degrees in anthropology and the experience that you've had. It really does start with the initial intent. And if you don't have the intent, it doesn't really matter what you have.
Mm.
So I don't let people off the hook with stuff like this because I just can't. I'm proud of you and I'm glad you did it. And I'm like, I feel like you should actually put together a step-by-step guide for Black authors that are working in the space to say, here's how you can manifest, a Black and brown and indigenous people's ecosystem as you're producing not only your book, but other work in the world that you're in, because that's what we're really up against. We're up against not being able to get through any type of systems. And why can't we get through our own systems? That's something that's in your mind. That's a mindset issue, when you really think about it. But there's two things I want to do. One, I want to read this one chapter from your book, but I really did. I really, really wanted to ask you. So I have two things. You are here at the perfect time with design anthropology because we're in a crushing, terrifying place of artificial intelligence and you know, massive, massive change, right? Artificial general intelligence. Are you doing any work in this space? Because the systems that were designed back in the day that you were describing were designed by white men. Those are informing what's happening right now in artificial general intelligence movements and general and AI. What can you do to help us not be erased? You know what I
Okay.
mean?
So I'm not doing that work, even though I touch upon it. But
You do.
and the
Okay.
reason why I don't feel like I need to do that work is like Ovetta Simpson is doing that work.
Okay.
And
Can you say her name again?
Ovetta
Okay, I'll put that in the show notes.
Sampson
Okay.
is doing that work.
Better Simpson. Okay.
And doing so like in the heart of Babylon, where actively working to make sure that artificial intelligence is a technology that doesn't work to harm against our communities and other structurally marginalized communities. So because I'm still like again in that world, and I know the people who are in those institutions who are doing the work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And also importantly, building the next generation of researchers and developers or whatever to do that work. That I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, I can touch on it, but I
Okay.
don't have to put my. There's other places where I have greater expertise to put my energy in. My thing about artificial intelligence, it is a technology tool like all the other technology tools that we have. What we need to shape is the consciousness around it, which is what you're pointing to. So the consciousness around it is still based on this master slave, right? Where we using bots both as a substitute for what would be enslaved people, and we're also building technologies that continue to enslave other people or again serve as artificial slaves, right? It is that mentality that needs to be changed, and there are people who are doing that work. I talk about like there's the Indigenous Artificial Intelligence Group, which is a consortium of like um, researchers, activists, whatever, who is resetting the whole intentionality and around artificial intelligence based on indigenous notions of interdependency, of reciprocity, et cetera, right? Disrupting that master slave structure that has been built. So there's a lot of good people that who are doing that work, and I try to amplify that work. Um, but it's tied to, like I said, right now we're in the last gasp of a white supremacist patriarchal system, and that's why we're feeling so much of the pressure. Like 2020, like cynical as you want to be about like a lot of the organization's commitment, it moved the dial, and it moved the dial so far that this is the pushback, right, that we're experiencing, in the sense that like, oh, we're just going to have to take down DI completely because it was working. People were in positions that they were not in before. People were paying reparations. Like I'm in California, like literally there was a bill to provide reparations that was getting like going through the process of getting approved. So it's one of those things that like again, this is just the major pushback because those things were being working effectively and bringing
Mm-hmm.
about structural change, right? So I always say it's like this is the point where if you're doing the work of anti-racism, if you're doing the work of like social justice, this is the point where we have to push back even harder. We have to take back the narratives. We have to in some ways, and again, it's a thing where like I said, as an anthropologist, I'm a student of history. Like, go look at the Reconstruction and post-Reconstruction. We are in that spiral moment of that before, where again, coming out of the Civil War, all a bunch of things to change. 40 acres of a mule, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then again, those who are invested, right, in maintaining a white supremacist patriarchal structure push back. And that's where we begin to see the Jim Crow laws in the South. You, again, like the weird stuff in terms of the labor movement in the North with the exclusion of Black folks in those labor movements. Like you begin to see those things kind of ferment. But again, it's a cycle, right? It's a cycle, it's a spiral. So the thing is that the work of diversity, equity, inclusion will continue to happen. The demographics of it just show like you cannot move forward in an industry in the next 30 years serving only white men. It's just not possible. So the global balance has shifted, the internal balances have shifted in terms of the demographics. We just need to push back harder, and we can only do that in solidarity with one another, right? So why I talk about like Black and Indigenous solidarity. Black folks, we are the labor. Indigenous folks, we are the land. If we two groups come together in solidarity of each other's struggle, it is all over, because you have the land and the labor all fighting against structures of oppression. And it is the divide and conquer that has been successful in keeping us from moving these forward. But whenever we come together, 2020, like that was a global solidarity movement, right? And now, again, Palestine is turning into a global solidarity movement as we begin to see the connections between what's happening there and what's happening here, and begin to sort of say, if this is all about the money and who has the money, let's begin to disrupt those systems, right? And that's what the student movement of divestment is about. It's like, let's withdraw the funding, right? Even though the U.S. government continues to print out bombs, right, to be sent to kill Palestinian people in Gaza.
I mean, it's interesting. Your book, Decolonizing Design, a Cultural Justice Guidebook. It's published by MIT, and they just removed.
It's published by MIT Press.
Yes.
And so again, this is a thing where like you have to understand the relationships, right? So again, MIT Press is not MIT.
That's good to know. Yeah.
And again, it's a thing
for context for people that don't even know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
The Massachusetts Institute of Technology will no longer require prospective faculty to write a document explaining how they would enhance the university's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. They were the first to do that. And I guess I only read that out loud because I love that they're not connected, but I also love that there is this book with the word MIT on it. I feel like there's still some justice, that's being served no matter what. You can't stop diversity, equity, inclusion. You can't stop it, right? I mean, I think that's your point, that
so
there's
again,
all different kinds of ways for us to make things happen.
It's a thing where people are, let's say, I would say companies and institutions are in some ways looking to what happens in November, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Because so again, and I see this as again as a person who does like consultancy, like everyone's like, Dori, we love you, but we are not going to be open about any of this stuff that we are doing, right? We're not going to be open about any of this stuff we're doing until we see the results of November. Because if Trump comes in, again, this is the thing where the legal structures begin, like we don't want to get sued, basically, for doing the right thing. Or we will figure out another way to do it. I always point to the fact that like IBM had as an organization, I think it's like in 1921 they were hiring Black and female employees, right? This is 1921. I guess in the 1930s and 40s they were hiring people with disabilities before the Americans with Disabilities Act. So so again, I think organizations that actually really want to be profitable in ways, right? They will continue to do the work. They just may not be so open and loud about doing the work. But the work will continue to be done because they know in order to survive, they have to embrace a wide variety of cultural communities, right? To economically survive as a business.
Absolutely.
And
I
that's
love
the
that.
part where, but at the same time, we all have to help out, right? In the sense of like politically fight back. And again, in November, everyone's looking at the presidential election. It's like, no, what's happening in Congress? What's happening in, your local school boards? What's looking like the presidential thing, whatever, that is what it is. But it's all again, like who are your judges that you're voting for in your local elections? That's going to determine what's actually going to happen in terms of which way our society is going to go. And that's the
Yeah.
work that has to be done as well as building alternative systems to voting, so that we can have a community of care, because that's how we survive. That is how we've always survived, is in community. So how we build these structures of community solidarity, so that if we don't need or want to rely on the government, we can rely on each other to care for each other.
I love that. Yeah, I was at an event with Jan Schakowsky, and she said, she's in her 25 years in office, she's never seen it this bad, and so her goal is to focus on getting 4 more representatives through Congress, to fight back, Donald Trump. So because if we don't get those 4 people in Congress, it's to what you're talking about. It's going to be another long road, to fight, to have the opportunity to even fight back. It's going to be harder for us. But listen, I have a couple rapid fire questions before
Sure.
you leave. Okay. I really got to get some of this out because, okay, you love hip hop. I want to know what is on your hip hop playlist right now.
They not like us. They not like us. They like us. Which for me is super sweet, because when I lived in okay, I've never been a Drake fan, but when I lived in Toronto, it is very hard to survive and not at least pretend like you're a Drake fan. So I feel so liberated being back in the United States, and to have like Drake, all the things that I felt about Drake, as to why is he such a big thing, like to be taken down systematically by Kendrick Lamar. It's just
okay.
beautiful.
Let's not get my show banned, because we got Drake obsessed people here. So don't get me kicked off. Okay, so I want to ask you. You're always wearing beautiful clothes and you have beautiful backgrounds. What's your go-to fashion? Where do you go to get your clothes?
So most of my clothes is made bespoke by Haute Couture. So
Oh my
a
goodness,
black and
wonderful.
white duo based in Toronto. So they made the majority of like the clothes that when I post on Instagram, like you have like 500 likes. That's normally a Haute Couture made especially for me. And a lot of it is it's still one of the great collaborations, because I'll come in and I say, I had a dream of a field of
I love
flowers
you so
and
much.
I was the garden. And then, 6 weeks later, 8 weeks later, there's a dress that is the visual representation of that dream. So working with Chris and Jim of Host Couture is they will dress me forever.
We're definitely going to have that in the show notes for sure, because I want to check it out too. So, what book have you read at least 2 times? And the reason I'm asking this question is I actually got into a conversation with Viet on Instagram about this. Who reads a book twice? And I was like, the only book I've ever read twice in my life is The Grapes of Wrath, John Steinbeck.
Oh, I read and reread my books a lot,
And
all the
not your own book though,
time.
because that would make sense. Somebody
No, no,
book that's
no.
not your
I'm
own.
just saying, like I have. You only see a part here, but like I have an extensive library in my house of fiction and nonfiction, and I'm constantly like rereading them. So the thing I'm rereading a lot now is actually just the Anthology of Blackness.
Ooh,
And I'll uh
I
the
love the
state
cover. It's
of Black
amazing.
design, and it's
Yes.
mostly I'm rereading it because um, I'm just really, as I prepare for like the fall and everything, just wanting to be closer to like the Black community of design. So a lot of the
Thank
people
you.
who wrote the book, like I know them and I've met them. And so I'm reading and rereading their work just so that I can feel closer to it, and also figure out what are the ways in which I can support the work that they're doing.
Is there any part of the book that you'd want to read out loud, but we probably don't have time for that? Is there any one phrase or a quote that really sort of stands out to you as something that's so powerful and
I
important?
mean, we didn't talk about the super token, and I think that's a
Oh, I
really
love
just
super token. I
important
never.
concept for me because it's actually going to be my next book. My next book is going to be
Oh.
super tokens, the first and the only.
Hmm.
Um, so I mean, I didn't actually bring it here with me. I don't know where I put it.
Is it
Um,
under? Is it under the table of contents?
uh, in terms of the super token,
Yeah.
it
What chapter
opens
are you
up
on?
the beginning of chapter 4.
Let me see here.
So super token.
Four starts in page 7.
But a super token, I tell you the definition hard. It's a super token is a person who's of structurally marginalized identities whose talents are so desired by institutions that those institutions are able to kind of put aside their aversion to their identities in order to have access to those talents. So Barack Obama is a super token, right? One of the first and the only, wanted all of his talents, but a lot of people really hated his existence, right? In that work. I talk about at OCAD being a super token. Well, actually, most of my career being a super token, where people want to have access to like my intelligence, right, in terms of pattern recognition and strategy, but oftentimes getting bullied actually in many of the places I've worked because they couldn't stand the fact that those intelligence resided in this black cis female neurodiverse body.
Honey, I am like, I have chills talking to you. I'm like, I'm like, if I had, I mean, it was so hard to get you on my show because you are so in demand. Because now that I know that you're a super token, like, I feel like there's a song by Liz Fair called Supernova. I feel like there should be a
Mhm.
song written about the super token. But, you're just so powerful and grounded and intentional and, focused. I almost feel like if there was a way to, take snippets of all the things you're saying and automate them and push them out on every single social channel, every single article, every single YouTube clip, YouTube short. I mean, I just have this vision of you being able to almost be like the Gary V of, of seriously of design anthropology, the Gary V of conversations around, diversity, equity, inclusion in the context of all things. I don't think people understand your depth of understanding of how integrated design is in making into freedom. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just, the freedom to like create and make is the only way that we're ever going to be free. I swear to God, like if we can't be free to make things, we're always going to be on the plantation. You know
Well,
what I
this
mean?
is the
And I,
thing where I say like the purpose of design is actually to create the conditions for liberatory joy. So liberation comes from the fear. I would say I talk about the fear to be able to say no to things that harm you. Is That's liberation. And then joy comes from connection, right? To be able to connect not just to yourself, but also to, other people, the environment, the water, the land. It comes from like deep, deep sense of connection. That's what joy is. That's why we love music. That's why we love, food. These are things that actually connect us with one another. And so the purpose of design is to create the conditions for liberatory joy. That if you're not doing that as a designer, um, then I'm to the point saying you should just probably just stop designing because what you're making is oppression, right? You're just making oppression. And so that's what I tell the students, that tell my clients is like, what are you doing to bring forth liberatory joy? What conditions are you creating for liberatory joy? Because going back to being a design anthropologist, what are our values, how they're being manifested in design, and how they're experienced? The values are liberatory joy. Design is the way to make that manifest so that people can, again, tangibly experiences that. And that is the power of designers, is to create, again, the conditions for that to happen. And so when we talk about all these technologies, all these design techniques, all these design histories, it's like it all should be leading towards liberatory joy for our bodies and our communities. And to the extent to which things have been designed that have not led to that, have led to oppression. We need to dismantle all of that. And if we need to, rebuild from scratch.
Rebuild from scratch. Well, listen, Dori, this has been an amazing conversation. Everybody needs to pick up Decolonizing Design, a Cultural Justice Guidebook. And I will suggest that I actually picked up my book from bookshop.org. As much as I love Amazon, and I am an Amazon creator.
I always tell them, go to your local independent bookstore.
If you have one, definitely. If you have an independent bookstore in your community. But I actually picked this up, like I said, at bookshop.org, which is an independent bookseller, and I loved it. It came perfectly wrapped and cared for, and this book is available now. And Dori can be found everywhere online. If you type in Dori Tunstall, you will get all kinds of information, including Wikipedia's. It just goes on and on. So she's got a lot of great stuff, and I think Dori also has a wonderful website. I'll put those in the show notes. It's actually a Typepad account. You can take a look at that. In the meantime, Dori, did you have any question you'd like to ask me before we close out?
No.
All right.
Thank you very much for the beautiful, beautiful conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you so much. Everybody, thank you for joining me on the Honest Field Guide podcast. We're looking forward to seeing you next time. I'm JinJa.
I'm Dori.
All right, we'll see you soon. The Honest Field Guide is produced by the team at Birk Creative, where brand and multi-channel strategies are designed to help you get attention, grow, scale, and keep up with the pace of change. The music on the podcast is written and performed by Utah Carol. You can find their songs everywhere online to buy or stream. The opinions expressed on the Honest Field Guide are solely those of the hosts and guests.